One of the most powerful results that occurs when one truly gives their life to Christ is the marked personal transformation that takes place, often immediately. And just when we think we understand how God transforms people at salvation, He does something that blows our minds. Today's guest, Oscar Ellis, had an encounter with the Holy Spirit before fully giving his life to Christ after decades of searching for truth through New Age approaches. But incredibly, when he did give his life to Christ, the drug addictions of his wife, who had not committed to Christ and had no interest in giving up her addictions, vanished. And their very broken family was healed. That isn't belief. That is supernatural power. Please meet Oscar Ellis. Oscar Ellis, here you are.
Here I am.
A long journey, It's not easy to get here from, central Canada?
Yeah.
Manitoba?
Although, it's not hard to get here.
Yeah.
When you pray about it beforehand, turns out. That was one of the easiest flights I've ever had.
Is that right?
Which is silly because I brought a 3-year-old with me. So. But that panned out.
Well, I had a chance to meet your wife, Mia, and Henry.
Yeah.
And we're late getting started because I was having so much fun hanging out with those guys. What a cute guy.
Mm-hmm.
People come and sit in that chair because typically they have experienced God. We typically aren't having debates around Christian doctrine and theology. It's about experiences and people sharing those. So what brought you all this way?
Well, it's fair to say that I had a supernatural experience. I think at the time I wouldn't have even known what words to use. Because whilst I'd been an Orthodox Christian for a couple of years beforehand, I hadn't read the Bible. It was a strange book to me. So then, crying out in the middle of the night and being blanketed by some golden peace-giving presence, that's different to what you'd expect. If anything, it was closer to what I would have expected out of some past experience to do with New Age upbringing or to do with my involvement in various minuscule but occult practices, That, because it has a sort of magical element to it. However, the peace that it brings, you don't get from anything else but this, and also it drew me deeply into the Bible. When people say they're on fire for the Bible, and people say that, like it's a phrase that pops up and you hear it, I'm like, okay, cool, whatever that means. Oh, now I know what that means. And I didn't even ask to feel that way. I didn't ask for particularly anything except to know like what's going on. And I was blanketed by the Holy Spirit, which I now am confident in calling it that. After being drawn into the Bible and learning about it and learning words like anointing. Oh, okay. Because the moment I was blessed with a variety of healings that removed countless addictions, pains of the past. And that's an interesting one, pains of the past, because it shouldn't have even come up on the list. You live your life 32, 33 years of existence saying, I have a memory and I have pain in the past. Well, what if it wasn't there? That's ridiculous. But it was all erased, taken away from me in a particular moment. That's the introductory spiel, I think, Stacey.
So that's pretty exciting. We're going to get into the details of all of those things. And in that description, you mention things in your past. And so to really appreciate the value, the full value of your experience, it's important to know what your prior experiences were. What did you come out of? You mentioned some New Age practices. How would you describe your formative years up until all the way until this experience you're talking about now?
So England, I'm from England, and that has a completely different spiritual currency and spiritual atmosphere. I would say that history, that deep, damp fog that hangs over the island has a real tangible spiritual feel as well. I happen to be from the town that Aleister Crowley, who was a renowned Satanist, lived and died in and threw curses around onto the town. Whether they worked or not, I don't know. But I can tell you that it has that sort of underlying sadness, I think, to it. And if you're a middle-aged woman, you're probably going to have a crystal in your home.
Yeah.
That's where we're at over there. So day one for me was my mother, bless her, she wanted to know more about the baby boy in her womb. And so she went to see a medium. And this particular medium said that my soul was in Peru, imprisoned and being tortured for religious beliefs. And I found that out at a young age as a boy. My past life experience is being told to me, recounted to me. Which is troubling.
Yeah.
It's troubling because you have too many questions at that point. You say, well, where did I come from? Is this body important? Should I go and finish up over there? What do you know about that? And the answer is nothing. But you become questioning to reality, and reality can be simple. It often is. This table is a table. That's fantastic. I'm glad it is. But there's this whole world that's opening up around you. There's a spiritual world. We're going to do crystals. We're going to do guided meditations, asking everyone in, gurus and whoever else. So that's the initial atmosphere there as a child that I'm coming into.
So you're being shaped by sort of New Age and occultish practices. Is that right? Or was this just one trip that she made to a medium?
No, my mother could be classified as a New Age woman. So I think it's fair to say that she was a woman of the forest, and lovely woman. People have said she's full of love and good intent. And that's fair to say about a lot of these types of people too, that intention is there. Everyone wants to be a light worker, let's say, or they want to do something healing, like Reiki, right? Which I underwent a number of times as a kid. I have relatives who are mediums who say they speak to the dead, and that always frustrated me because my father passed away when I was 13. He had epilepsy for basically my whole life. We can begin that story. I'll say that he had an affair with my mother's best friend when I was 1 year old, and my mother was out with me and then rushed home. She had that bad sense come over her, and she ran home. Didn't find any evidence of anything. But then a year later, he, in his guilt, revealed to her that had happened, at which point, his mental health started to deteriorate. My father was kind of an adventurous and witty guy, and he, once upon a time, was riding a motorbike with a loosely clipped-on helmet, and he flew off and cracked his head on the road, and brains spilling out on the road. So he had a nice big crater in his head that he encouraged me to feel a couple of times. And what that resulted in after this affair and the stress and the guilt, when you hold on to a secret, it often encourages an illness, I find. I've known a number of people who they're holding on to something that they need to make known, to confess to, and it makes them sick in the time that they don't. Whether that's a self-forgiveness they haven't done, or whether that's they need some forgiveness from somewhere, but they haven't done it yet. I find that affects people physically. So he developed epilepsy to a degree that was averaging 5 seizures a day. He couldn't live with us. He couldn't control his emotions. And he would, I saw him do things like smash a glass bottle over his head and, like glass sticking out of his head. And he was very frustrated with what he had become in terms of inability to control himself with physical and verbal outbursts and things like that. So it was a violent space. So he had to move out, obviously.
So you're experiencing this as a child. So this is a
Yeah.
pretty traumatic thing to experience as a young child.
Yeah, it wasn't good. Yeah. In fact, well, I'm a very different person now than I was. I'm a very uncovered person. I'm not as much anxious or in pain as I was back then. But it was terrible. In fact, there is a chart to chart these things out called an adverse childhood experience score, which therapists use. I've obviously been in therapy for a number of years, or I had been until we'll get into that in a minute. But so I was a 10 out of 10 on that. There was a lot of abusive, painful, and neglectful behavior.
So in your childhood, we're talking now, gosh, even in the womb, New Age practices, plus trauma, plus you're in a town where there's a prominent Satanist that is actively carrying the flag for his kingdom.
Yeah, that's an interesting aspect. This is all new to me, the reality of spiritual warfare, and that you can be minute by minute in battle. It's like, okay, there's work to do. That's so interesting,
Yeah, and you think of that's your parents in the state that they're in then, so you wonder when you begin to understand and that these formerly considered superstitious nonsense beliefs actually turns out they're real. You wonder what happened in the generations before your parents, if any of this is being passed down from generation to generational curses is what we're talking about with that. So basically what you're doing is revealing that there's a lot of opportunities for the enemy of God to take footholds in your life early on through textbook doors, oppression, through New Age practices, right?
Yeah, to say a few. I mean, really.
Yeah, seeking spirituality and hidden information through something other than God, right? Trauma and other things. So it's adding up. You can see it adding up now, right? In your early. So how is this affecting you as you become a teenager and beyond?
Deep depression. I got to a point of I couldn't stand to go and see my dad for another weekend. Just collapse in front of me and stare at me. Like, who are you? Drooling, right? If you've been around someone who has seizures and if you love them and care for them, it's not fun.
No.
So as a kid, with that as your role model, I was 13 when I actually prayed with no particular guidance to prayer or anything, that he would just die. And it was a few days later that he died. Now,
wow.
you turn the corner. I don't know if that's good or bad. Honestly, it happened. But at the time, it was terrible because there on the bookshelf, it's a New Age home. So your thoughts create your reality. I became terrified to think anything. I was actively pulling back. And they wanted to move me up a year in primary school. I've got active faculties upstairs, it works. But I was terrified to think. So it's like, no, thank you. I don't want to have another thought ever again. I think I just killed my dad.
Yeah.
And that time was just another, like the blanket of darkness just continued to weigh me down. It was worse and worse. And I was deeply paranoid. Everyone who laughed in school was laughing at me. I know, egotistical, but it's part of the same problem, which is like, man, everyone hates me. Man, like I deserve a lot of things, a lot of bad things, which didn't make a lot of sense to people looking at me because I was also very popular. I sang in the school concert and it was like, oh, a cute little boy singing but I was just deeply sad. I would self-harm a lot. I would do things like lay on a skateboard at midnight in my mid-teens and just roll down the hill, hope that a car would get me, because I wasn't brave enough to do it myself, but if they could at least send me to the hospital, we could see who cared. And man, I was just out. I was out on a limb looking for somebody to care. My mom was too busy, bless her. She had to work. So there's just like my younger sister and I would just do the box meals, in the evening, coming home from school a lot of the time. And that's not to disparage or talk ill of my mom, who did wonderful things. She was full of love, obviously. She loved her children. But it was that type of dark time for all of us.
As you evaluate that, and you're a smart guy, as you look at that societal reality, and then layer on the lens of spirituality that you have a richer understanding of now, what do you think was really going on in that time?
I think it was an allowed attack on my potential. I think it was, the enemy was fully active in my life. Easy pickings, no dad around, and just spiritually off the mark. So yeah, all the doors were open. Let's get this guy. There were a lot of strange and weird things and deeply painful things in my childhood, setting me up to attempt on my life, basically from age 13 to age 30. It's been a long span of suicidal ideation and what I thought was joy and moments of joy and pockets of joy, like a walk in the woods. Can't get much better, but there was no success in my life. And every logical success I came to through my own means and through relying on others, other men, human men, to tell me how it was going to go, just did not pan out. Just didn't. Everything has been under attack. That's how I feel about it now.
I'm assuming no understanding or knowledge of any of this as you're growing up. What was your understanding of God at this time?
I always believed in God, and that brought me joy from a young age. And I wouldn't have had words for it, and I didn't even think it was the Christian church. I just understood innately that there must be some design and order. I remember daydreaming out of this little idyllic countryside English school, staring out the window at the fields, and there's an old stone church in the background over there, and we would walk to every Easter and stuff like that. But I just thought, oh, he's everything, isn't he? Everything is made by and created by. And I wouldn't find words for that were accurate until a few months ago, because I tried a lot of different things to find that until I got here. But yeah, I had a relationship with and would always try and talk to and communicate with God. But also I had no tools, it's like being naked in the snow. It's like, okay, are you up there? Yeah. But what do I do? Mm-hmm.
So you're lost while you are communicating somehow with God. Is that right? You still felt lost? Were you talking to him?
Yeah, I was in prayer. Did I get any answers? No, I don't think so. And I cried out in despair many times, which is one of the interesting aspects of this story, is that this time it was answered. But it was just the wrong cocktail of things beforehand, I suppose. Like, you get drunk and cry out. Or, whatever it was for me, I just wasn't there yet. But there was a lot of anger, a lot of resentment, and a lot of oppression, I was alcoholic for a few years, and a lot of marijuana, and going into university and stuff.
You just wonder what, so let's just, God is love.
Yeah.
So the question would pop in at this point, what would a loving God allow a thing like that? If a guy actually believes in God, crying out to God, what would be going on in that relationship that would cause him not to show up when you're 17 years old? Were you praying to a counterfeit God? Was it a new age tinged God? Were you praying to the universe rather than the creator of the universe? You know what I'm saying? Was your home filled with Buddhas and dream catchers and, crystals, because those are the things that give you hope and prosperity?
Yeah, all the above. Yeah. It was, the home was full of that. In fact, there was even something that maybe some people have heard of. There's a branch of, they call themselves Christians, and I don't know where the Holy Spirit isn't, but I'll say that, we had these compressed resin things with crystals in them and metal shavings, and it was meant to, like Tesla energy, and we're doing all this like softcore energy work with whatever, and people sell them online and you can get those. I was throwing those at cell towers, I'm like, we've got to stop the evil in the world. And yeah, there was a lot of alternative. I did acupuncture to ayahuasca, I was 21 years old when I was so done with depression. And I hadn't done hallucinogenics prior to anything, but I was like, this one's a medicine plant. Therefore, medicine good. Me go that way. So I went out to Peru to do that. And Peru, funnily enough, was the place that my soul was meant to have been in the past life, right? So I thought, I'm going to get some answers, finally. I was always searching, but down every avenue, and there's a lot of avenues. And yes, there were dream catchers and crystals and Buddhas and all sorts of stuff. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So I don't know what the answer to the question is. The question being, why was God not responding to your pleas sooner? What's your thoughts on that?
I don't know.
Why does God do what he does? Right?
I do feel like perfect timing is a thing.
Yeah.
And I'm not resentful to that. I wouldn't have come halfway across the world on my initial endeavor to Canada or now to here without that. And when you're used to something, pain, it's not so bad. It's like, okay, God, that's fine. What were you up to? But tell me now. I don't mind knowing now. You can let me know what that was for. But if it's for anything, it's just to show you who's going through it how strong you are too, Well done.
Do you look back on it now and recognize his presence with you in it, or no?
Yes, but only because I experienced his timeless peace when the Holy Spirit came down upon me. And that just gives you a sort of a knowing that is relaxing to say, oh, well then, yeah, you were there. And then logically you can piece it together and say, he hasn't spoken to me with words to say, oh yeah, I was over there and I was right by you. And it hasn't been like that for me. But I do understand now that the puzzle is beautiful. It doesn't not make sense. It doesn't not make sense. God is everywhere, and God is involved in all things, and that's all I need to know and say about that in so many ways.
Yeah.
It's painful, but...
Yeah, I when you speak of these things, I reflect in my own life, and I have my own path of darkness. And from the perspective I have now, I look back there, and boy, I made some really bad decisions.
Oh, yeah.
But I also, when I look, and I look closely, there are decisions I was prepared to make that outside of my control were forced in a different direction. People responded differently in a way that I didn't actually make the decision that I was going to make. And when I look back on that, it's just evidence that God said, hey, look, you're making bad decisions, and I'm here with you. I'm going to shift the train track here a little bit so that there was protection. There was divine intervention in some of the worst places I've been, I feel like, to prevent me from going as low as I would have gone. I see that. I'm wondering if you see that in that, or if you say, nope, when I had a choice to go left or right and left was the worst, I went left.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I didn't have that precise experience. And that is a testament to, I think it is important that, yeah, you could raise a child and they could be 20 and they could go somewhere else and do their bad thing. And then, hopefully come back from that. But I didn't have the household with stability or even a sense of Christian morality, or not even culturally, but just in its being.
Yeah.
That it wasn't there. And so, no, I feel like the only thing, if anything, he did was just not let me die. All the suicide attempts and all the like climbing cliffs without an adult was just, well, you're not going to die yet. Kind of bulletproof until we can deal with you, sort of thing. But you can go ahead and be miserable.
Yeah, well, maybe that's one way that you can say, yeah, I made a lot of decisions that I rolled the dice many times. Yes. The odds should have stacked up that one of those times it was going to happen.
Yeah.
And yet here I am.
Yeah, I totally should have, if you want to call it luck, it's not really that, but,
yeah,
I definitely rolled the dice and made terrible decisions. And chiefly in terms of sin, it's not, if you don't think sin's a real thing, it doesn't, every day you're going to be deeply entrenched in that.
Yeah.
Just even in your own thoughts, even in listening to, it's funny, I'm a musician, right? And listening to music used to be like emo music and rock music. Imagine, I haven't even prayed that many times as I've said incredibly negative lyrics about myself. Because you listen to that on the way to school, on the way home from school, and you want to be in constant prayer. Okay, well, congratulations. The music you're listening to, you're in constant prayer to something else. Even if you think you're a nihilist and it's just the void. You're at least painting your atmosphere in a certain brush, and it's dark. And it's going to affect your life. I don't listen to anything else but worship and classical these days, which is hilarious because I thought it was so silly as a kid. Worship music? Oh. I wouldn't touch anything else. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a powerful spiritual truth that I've noticed that in my own life. I look back on what I listened to, and there was an appeal to me for very aggressive music with very aggressive lyrics.
Yeah.
Like, I look at it now, I'm like, man, what in the world are you doing? It completely affected me. And that's an interesting way to put that. In constant prayer, that's what's happening when you are internalizing those lyrics.
Well, that's why the word for music in my book is insidious, because it's such a cultural norm to use it as entertainment. But particularly in the last 10 years, like lyrically, what are we dealing with? It's really quite overtly disgusting. And the spirit of lust is going to be very active in all of that music. And you know who I sound like? It's hilarious to hear how I talk now. These are the people I laughed at as a kid, us down in the South, right? Just telling you how that is such a meme, it's such a joke, that old housewife, oh, the devil's in the TV, and, well, no, actually, she was right. And
turns out they were right.
Whoops, yeah.
That devil music and that sort of thing, you think, come on, man, it's just electric guitar. Don't be fearful of a guitar.
Yeah, you don't see it coming, but there it is, and suddenly there's this whole created order. And New Age dabbles in this because they'll talk about frequencies. So they'll talk about like a Tibetan healing bowl, or they'll talk about 432 hertz, which is it used to be the classical standard tuning for a piano. The A would be at 432, which lines up with the Fibonacci spiral, and a lot of people like to talk about that as evidence of creation. Sure, great, yeah, maybe. And then supposedly we shifted it to be slightly sharper so that it was more painful to listen to, even like, well, the beginning was the word. I do think sound is important. I do think what you're listening to and filling your home with and your mind with between your ears you're creating this strange little space, you know. I don't know. I think that's a fascinating subject.
We
don't need to go too deep.
We should totally do a separate episode on that. I think that
we should,
I love that. That's good. And man, even in my transitions, my transitional years into a much richer connection with God, there was a part of me that could not listen to Jesus music.
Oh yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh, it's so lame.
Cringe.
It's like I just can't. It's so whiny, and I can't do it. And even, and I look back on that now, I'm like, that's clearly the demonic influencing me, and when my eyes were opened and I began to take on a posture of worship anew, I was like, wait a minute. Worship music is not lame. This is some really good stuff right here. And I find, I'm like you now, I find myself pretty much exclusively listening to worship music. I've learned that the demonic cannot stand worship music.
Right.
And with that, so we have a Amazon Alexa up there, and I'll just get it started in the morning, and throughout the day, it's just playing worship music in our home, whether we're here or not.
Right. Yeah.
And
that's probably quite significant.
It's just in the background of everything that we do, and now I hear my kids singing the lyrics to songs that I didn't know they knew that are that, rather than the stuff I used to make them listen to because Dad's cool, right?
That's cool. That's got to be cool.
But
that's cool in different ways.
It's making a difference in our home.
Yeah. Interesting.
It really is.
We, whilst we're on music, I had never done my own show, played music just quietly in my bedroom. There's a lot of stuff that I put up online that nobody ever listened to, and it was all quite soft, gentle, classical, little countryside boy things. And I'd never taken it on tour, but I've been in bands that are now, doing quite well for themselves, which I left because alcoholism and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But, so anyway, that's many years of being decent at an instrument, not doing anything. But it's one of the things that was revealed as a skill now. It's one of the things that when I gave my life to this church that, by the way, was in walking distance, which was significant because in a particularly terrible year, which we'll get to shortly, I was given a DUI, rightly so. But the house I happened to move into was that far from the church, and, I was saved there. But I played music there at the Christmas Eve thing, excitedly too. Like, oh, there's point to the fact that I can play an instrument now. And that's a strange feeling to have when you thought you were going to be really cool. You thought you were going to be almost famous, You thought you were going to be touring around with, what's her name? That actress. Doesn't matter. Stuff like that, right? But then it finds purpose in the body of Christ, which is bizarre but beautiful.
It's amazing how a spiritual transformation can open your eyes to something that blinded you, but also pulled you in a direction that you didn't think you were being pulled. No, this is good. Do you hear it? How strong that is? I mean, what kind of guitarist you have to be to do that, right? I mean, there's no drummer in the world like this guy. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm listening to. It's the bass line I'm really following.
Right.
And you say all the things, right? And but there's an awakening that occurs when you come into deep, rich connection with the living God.
Yeah.
And you realize things are actually spiritual, and you didn't realize it to that degree before. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh man, you can see it. I think everybody listening to this right now is like, I can totally see that. And so what an interesting sidebar around what we're praying when we're listening to music.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Just like a lot of culture, I think, is subtly trying to indoctrinate us into ways of being that are basically worship. Like you've had a speaker on here that was talking about yoga, right? There's a lot of things that we just do. And I'll casually mention, I'm pretty sure Spider-Man and his web-slinging hand symbol is like not even a far cry to say that's crazy. I don't think that's crazy that that's what he does to shoot his webs, right?
Yeah.
It's the devil horns there. It's like, I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist about it, but when you start to look around and notice some things, you're like, well, maybe that's weird. And it's okay that it's weird, because it's going to get weirder when you give your life to Jesus. That's one of the weirdest things I've ever done, but it's been nothing but successful.
Yeah.
In a life that had no success. And if success is weird to you, maybe you want to try it out.
Well, so we look at this, and you're going to see it in your life as well, and it's been repeatedly discussed here. When you come to the realization that this primitively superstitious notion of angels and demons and God and devil and all that stuff, before we just had this, before humans awakened themselves to intellect and was able to dismiss that. When you come to the realization that that stuff actually is real and exists, and then you say, okay, so I'm not just a raised in church all my life, sheltered kid who thinks the devil's in everything and has no experience in life. And it's just fear-mongering, right? It's just fear-mongering, these Christians. They don't know what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
When you come from a place like you come from, or things I've experienced and others as well, and you come to the realization, it's like, okay, nope, turns out that stuff's real.
Mm-hmm.
Then you say, okay, if there's a chief among them, Satan, what strategies would he use to pull as many people away from God as possible? Because it's not like he cares about you and wants you in his kingdom instead of he hates God. And so he's trying to, in my view, separate all his children from him. He's like, my intention is to destroy his destruction across the board. What would he do? Wouldn't he say, hey, look, I'm not going to be in the Western culture super overt and so that I'm obvious. I'm just going to get into the music a little bit, and it's going to be harmless. And people are going, anybody who identifies me in the music, the rest of the culture is going to shun as intolerant.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to put him. I'm going to get into cartoons. I'm going to have happy witches and pleasant witches, right?
That's a good one. Yeah.
They're going to be movies, and they're all funny and stirring the pot, and we'll get big celebrities to play these witches, and there's not actual witches, of course. Wouldn't that be a strategy?
Yeah, wouldn't it? Yeah, I think that's entirely the truth.
And can't you see it now? I see it now. That's what you're identifying. You're saying, hey, look, once you're awakened, you see things that you thought were nonsense previously.
Yeah, I think the way that Satan, if we're going to be overt in our names, which I find myself being these days, since it's all still fairly new to me, but yes, from that life of endless hedonism and endless fun and parties, not that I had much fun in them, I was deeply depressed, but it's all laid out on the table. You can have as much of this as you want. You can go and do whatever you would like, follow your heart, and that'll lead you right down into the depths. It's every piece of art and literature, it turns out. Whilst I had previously read a lot of psychology books, self-knowledge was chief forefront of my mind because I wanted so badly to be a dad. But I just feel it's ultimately a distraction now. I feel that if any book was going to teach me anything, and I only would have known this experientially, but that the Bible would be that brought me that peace, that brought me that, oh, you never had a father figure? Well, there you go. Instead of, young or, what am I trying to learn there? And all my logic and effort put into creating a certain type of art or creating a certain type of, to the universe, right? Or to what I call God, but had no defining boundaries of, was well, I'll just put out what I put out, and to endless lack of success, But the medium by which we work turns out quite relevant and important, and what we consume I'm finding to be even more drenched in importance and feeling as well.
The old saying, you are what you eat.
Yeah.
Applies to more than just food.
Yeah.
It's all kinds of food. Everything's food in some way. Yeah. And so we consume, we become what we consume.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Our relationships, our music, our food. That's why obesity is such it's amazing to see footage of the 1920s and 30s. People walking down the street. There's all these social media places now that restore old video footage of people walking down the street. Big cities, it's like hundreds and hundreds of them. Not a single person slightly overweight.
Yeah.
It's because we weren't manufacturing food yet, right? And so that's what we eat. And so here we are with all this obesity and sickness and death and cancer and heart disease. And so it's the same thing with our spirit. We think it's casually consuming really aggressive music with really aggressive lyrics, and we become that. And I think it's a fantastic tool of the enemy to pull us away from God a little bit at a time. And so revealing that is a cool part of this. We kind of left the conversation earlier to get to this, but you were in a place where you were it was getting darker for you, and you're in your teens, late teens, emerging into your 20s. So how did this progress from there? Are you close to experiencing God there, or are you still in the other direction?
Well, it's fair to say that I was closer, but by millimeters in terms of actual progress on myself, because I was still in that mindset. So I was coming out of, not even coming out of, but I was in the midst of alcoholism and daily marijuana use. And the time I spent on those things too is like thousands of hours, right, on a number of things. Video games, it turns out they're significant too. Marijuana, alcohol. I think if marijuana had anything significant to say to me, or bestow upon me, it would have relaxed me by then. And alcohol would have comforted me by then. And video games would have fulfilled me by then. And all those things would have been met, all those needs. Which is funny because when I gave my life to Christ, I gave him sincere attention for about a second. Not thousands of hours. I wasn't studying. I wasn't trying to become a master of Christianity, whatever that would be. But that's how much he cares, it turns out. That when you turn to him with that right heart posture for just a second, you get all of that. You couldn't put in enough hours into other things to get any similar result, which is hilarious. But anyway, in this particular time slot, when I was coming into my 20s, I was like a raw vegan, big new age. I had a backpack full of crystals. Yeah, we're going to leave these around town to heal people. It was like good intentions, right? Mm. But mindless good intentions and just a heart that wanted to do good in the world. But that was the time slot that 21 years old, nothing else has worked. And I've had experiences at that point of like people working on my chakras, on a massage bed and stuff like my hand shooting up to try and strangle myself. And now I don't know whether that's just the immensity of the pain I had been in with no outlet. I remember seeing one random woman who asked me if I was okay once. I cried for about an hour in her arms. It's like there's no outlet for a lot of this stuff. So maybe when the energy was going through, to give benefit of the doubt, it's like maybe I just couldn't look at that pain. Maybe that was me, or maybe it was demonic oppression. Maybe it was something happening.
You had an instance where your hand shot up and put around your own neck?
Yeah, like it couldn't take what was going on. We were trying to work through blockages in my chakras.
What do you mean you were trying to work through blockages in your chakras?
Well, what do I mean? I don't know. But I think I mean emotional pain.
Was this a counseling session, or was there some sort? I mean, what was?
Well, they called it emotional freedom technique, and what it was a mix of acupressure and people who were doing sort of soft Reiki or light work or something over my body, and they were trying to heal past pains, right? And for whatever reason, towards the end of that, I just had this moment of my hand like, no, I'm going to word it like this, but I would rather die than go there. Or maybe it was, no, I would rather you just be dead whilst we do this work, or, whatever the interpretation is. It's not really open to me. I don't have an answer for you, but I was having strange, always negative supernatural experiences during these things, during work like that. At best, I felt relaxed after a guided meditation. But relaxed is different to peace. So relaxed from smoking marijuana is different to God's peace. And we're going to get into this shortly, but I will jump ahead to say that when the Holy Spirit was upon me, it was a peace that I so badly needed that went beyond time. It wasn't just, I feel better right now. It was, it's okay. All the way back to the past, it's okay. All the way ahead in the future, it's okay. And right now, it's okay. That kind of peace is incredibly unique. I have never had that sensation that everything throughout time is okay. Okay. Well, that's relaxing, but it's different to being relaxed from imagining yourself sitting underneath a tree in a guided meditation. It's just different. It is. But
yeah, there's still a low hum running, even though you're relaxed.
Yeah,
the low hum of unpeace or whatever that is.
Right, and I think the New Age as well, they really want to take captive their thoughts, but they do that with the power of now. Eckhart, Tolle, I believe it is pronounced. He has that book, The Power of Now, which is, him sitting on a park bench and saying, if I still my thoughts enough, I can be really at peace. Good. I tried that too, but this is different. And it's a shame too, because if you really want to be in the now, you're someone who wants to live in the moment. Have you tried active spiritual warfare? Because you're going to have to be pretty present. Mm-hmm. You really want the excitement of this New Age witchcraft? I've had way more dream attacks. There's some cool stuff, which I'll get to. I keep premonizing this stuff that I'm about to talk about, but yeah, you want to live in the now, you probably want to at least consider what we're talking about here today, because it'll bring you into the moment. You're going to have to be there.
Well, I want to get to that. So I know if there are things that we need to preface that time that are going to add to what we need to talk about with that, I want to get to those, because I am chomping at the bit to get to this encounter and its repercussions.
Sure. I will do a little bit of lead up. I'm going to say that ayahuasca, 21 years old, clean, pleasant experience, interdimensional travel, great DMT. Okay, that's the chemical in your brain that's released when you go through these experiences in a little shack in Peru. Okay, great. The highlight from that was the very last vision. If it's anything to go by, was completely different from the rest, completely less spirals and crocodile men. And at this point, just fully, here's the world. It's on fire. There's some people standing there with crosses, and they are saved from the fire. And I remember thinking, oh, that's interesting. At 21, I'm 32 now. I remember thinking, oh, maybe I'll be Christian one day. And that was like the initial leading into the rest of the 10 years prior. So
that was a vision you had while in Peru?
Yes, whilst on this medicinal plant. And it had a different atmosphere too. It was like I would I would hope that this is what it was. I'm going to describe it as God stepping into the vision and saying, and understanding where I was at in my life and just saying, look at that. Because
so interdimensional travel, you mentioned that before. Is this you hallucinating through medicinal plants in this environment? Is that what's going on there?
Yeah. Sitting down in the dark, in the quiet, in a circle of people and drinking a drink. And what you have to do in that setting is you have to surrender to the spirits. And if you don't, you're in for a rough time, is how they describe it, because they won't treat you well otherwise. So I go in this meditative place of surrender, and you see visions of like animals tearing your face off and trying to scare you, and presences around you, stuff quite terrifying. But if you can surrender to them, which I did, and an interesting thing, you had a guest on who talked about ants coming out of her skin. I had ants walking into my skin and up my veins and through my body in some of those visions. But it was all very animal based. Right? It was all very, you're in the jungle and you can feel that. So yes, then it's you do experience the timelessness when you're on that type of drug. You do experience this strange setting of like, other worlds, and am I in my mind, or am I out of my mind? Am I traveling somewhere? I don't have an answer for that. But yes, it was full of magical strangeness.
Wow, so
I didn't enjoy it. I wouldn't recommend people do it.
Looking at it now, is that just the result of drinking this drink and being in a mental state that fosters this thing happening? Was it demonic? As you know, spirituality now, was that and God breaking in that time? We know there's a lot of quote unquote alternative spirituality offered in the world. When you get into a place of spiritual wisdom, you begin to recognize, and I think most people that have been on here, that have been in these places, would say, yeah, there's only two. There's God and the enemy of God. There's God and then all the alternatives. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And if you make God one option among all the alternatives, it's like, he's just one option. There's a lot of, I think that would be a tool of the enemy as well. When you consolidate all the other options into the enemy of God, just coming in different forms, as long as they're pulling you away from God, and God, if you look at a situation like you're describing now, would you describe that as, I just was hallucinating? Or would you say, maybe that was the enemy of God pulling me away from him through that?
Well, it's a hallucinogenic medicine. So from the outset, you know what you're trying to achieve, which is contact with, and I was still using the word God to say, okay, God of the universe, of whatever, but that word, help me out. I want to know you. Let's meet. Here I come. I thought I would get there, right, by going up astrally or something. But yeah, I think ultimately it just is one of the many flavors that Satan's going to offer. It's like, I have lots of flavors on the dish here, lots of colors to the palette. If God's was blinding white light, then, he gets to use the whole spectrum on this earth that he is, tasked with messing with. So, yeah, I just think it's one of those. However, would it not be in the realm of possibility that God could jump in and say, and here's a little something from me? Yeah. Right at the end. Totally possible.
Sounds like that's what he did, right?
Yeah, I think so. Because it struck me, I went to an eschatology class recently, and we were talking about Revelation, and it particularly struck me about the flood of flame and that symbolism, which is really the only thing I've remembered as well from that vision on that drug, was that capstone moment coming out of it of the cross, which is hilarious. Was it just because it's a cultural thing? Did I know about it growing up? Not really. That just wasn't my upbringing. So it was strange. And I didn't really think anything of it at the time until recently. So yeah, I just think it's part of his arsenal that we were trying to heal ourselves through jungle juice.
So you're still searching. So you're leading up to this this moment. So I'm assuming unfulfilled. You're back.
Yeah. I felt different spirits inhabiting my body from that point on, like the spirit of that medicine hadn't left for many months, that it was still in me. And so I'm going forward into my later 20s. People are dying, like my grandma, who I love dearly, and everyone's ill in my life, and I'm alone, and I don't have friends, and I move. I'm leaving the bands I was in to get out of alcohol, but also because I know I want to be a dad one day, which I knew from a young age too. That was my one dream. I'm going to be a dad one day. Wouldn't it be great to love a kid as much as my mom loves me? That seems like a real worthwhile task. So that was always on my to-do list. So I get myself into therapy. I got to do better. I don't make any money. I'm in a band. I've got to really straighten up here. So I do that. And I meet with these people in the US over Skype. I get talking to that guy. It's guided meditations. He's younger as well, and he's politically active, and he's kind of this cool, trendy therapist online. He has a group retreat, and I meet some Canadians. So as time ticks forward, I've cut ties with my mother and my sister and family because they were part of my abuse cycle. So I'm now isolated in a new town in the UK, just working a job, making mistakes and hanging around. And that progresses to, I think the next step for me is going to be to go to the Americas. I'm going to go to this group retreat. I'm going to go and one of them offers me a room in Toronto. You want to go live with us? Cool, yeah, we had some good discussions. We were talking about philosophy and all these exciting things. It's helping me. I feel more knowledgeable about my trauma. We're going to delve into self-knowledge together and do journaling every day and be a group of men who really want to affect a positive change in the world. Sounds good. Sounds like decent intent. It's not a terrible plan. But I have been cut off from my family at that point, and I've put so much trust into this therapist online, who is the only person I've ever spoken to about the immensity of the pain I was in as a child. And he develops into a character that's sort of quite controlling. And in moments where I said, I might go to church, he's like, we don't do that, Or, he's actually working with all the men in that household at that point. So he has quite his own little crowd in the house. And he has a few people in the States and whatever. But he's exerting a lot of power over young, vulnerable men. Turns out he was up to no good. He was sleeping with clients and, his female clients, and really exerting his power as a therapist in negative ways, sharing information about me and others to other people in the group to try and bring about something on his power trip. However, he was helpful to me. Everyone makes mistakes. I forgive that man. But it's one of those quite dreadful things that in my move to Canada to be a part of that, I was just deeply sad still. I'm in a cupboard in a bachelor pad in Toronto, not talking to anyone. Bless my wife, who I met at the time, who was Canadian, who was really the only sort of person I could at least have a more human friendship with, developed into a relationship with, So that was the beginning of something decent within that. But even that was under his thumb of, is she good enough for you? Are you going to step up and do what I tell you to do in the relationship? You have to do it this way. Don't have a wedding. Just go down to the courthouse, Basically ended up in a cult by accident with this therapist exerting control. We moved across the country to sort of escape that and began a business venture that, as the relationship with my wife worsened, my mother passed away quite suddenly from cancer at the same time that we began a business within the family. And that business secretly was accruing a lot of debt, or took a lot of debt to set up, which resulted in my father-in-law making an attempt on his life. This attempt was done in a way that doctors described as the most they had ever seen, the most of this substance they had ever seen someone ingest, to a point that by the time my wife and mother-in-law had made the 15-hour drive to get back to him, being told over the phone on the way there that, well, you might want to pull over, this looks like it's it. But they kept going. By the time they got there, it was, if he is going to survive, which he's not, he's going to be in a vegetative state. He's going to have no mental faculties left, and he will be that. So you can imagine the cries of his two young daughters and his wife when they enter that hospital room. And I was sort of separated from it by virtue of taking care of our son, 2 years old at the time, staying where we lived, but they were all there for a month and a half. So that began a journey for them of being by his bedside for 3 nights, where they didn't know what to do but cry and pray. And our brief foray into Orthodoxy and my wife's upbringing in a Protestant church that she had at least an education in was enough for her to pray sincerely. And so she began that. She would word it in a way that was, God, I know you can heal my dad. I don't know if you will, but I know you can. And I believe in your power. And that was the prayer that we were operating under as a new and unbelieving, frankly, called himself a Christian, but her with a little more faith by his bed praying that. And it was after that 3rd day that they got a little blink. Okay, there's a blink. They got a little thumb twitch. Okay, and the doctors keep coming in. Oh, well, that's a surprise. He's probably still going to die, though. You know, that type of attitude and medical realism about it. And please don't get excited because his brain is going to be mush. And they just kept praying and screaming and crying and calling out to God of their own, these 2 sisters, my wife and her sister. And it must have been a month later that he was eyes open, talking. And that was enough of a shock. And his words didn't make sense. It was like he had a stroke almost. It was like the words weren't coming out right, and every other word was drink, to do with what he drank, presumably just lodged in his mind of, I did that, but he couldn't remember doing it. You know, there's a lot of interesting aspects in the minuscule to do with the fact that he had a few beers that night. And, you know, I believe that opens a gateway to certain depression, because you wouldn't expect such a joy-filled man that he is in his heart to do something like that. But there he is beginning to talk again after being told that he's either dead or a vegetable. And it keeps improving. Well, after a while of the wheelchair, he's walking around. And after a while of that, if you saw him today, you wouldn't guess. You know, aside from his own confidence, which is a little knocked, and, you know, some of the emotional aspect of that taking his toll, there he is standing, walking, talking among us. So that's number 1, miracle 1 in this line of events of that shouldn't have happened. I think we've all normalized, like, yeah, sometimes weird stuff happens medically. Okay. But in this instance, with dead certainty, we were being told what the outcome would be, and it was dead different. It was a very living result. That shouldn't have been able to be the case. So, great. My wife has been praying that, God, if you do it, we'll go to church every Sunday. I'm going to take my dad to church. But following that, they don't. The pain of her and her family going through that sends her into a spiral of, man, I'm young. I got a kid. Like, my dad just did what? I've got to go out and make some friends again. I've been on an acreage trying to be a good girl and do whatever. So she goes out and begins a lifestyle to manage her pain now too. And she isn't going to church every Sunday. And she, goes back on her word and her promise to God. And that leads itself to, I'm aware of what it is at the time, and I'm saying, I don't really want to go out and drink. I'm a little older than you and your friend group. I don't really fit in, but I'm going out and doing it anyway and as a recovered alcoholic, I was always tentative of that anyway. But we get into a drinking habit on the weekends. We've got babysitters now because we're in the city. Great, let's go out and do that. But it becomes worse and worse and worse in terms of who you meet and drug opportunities that open up. There became like violence even. And I'm a pretty peaceful man. But under alcohol, it's a different game, So there's a lot of yelling and etc. in front of a young, impressionable boy. And it was heartbreaking. It was just awful. But there we are. I've moved across the country at this point to care for what I think is going to be another father figure who's going to have seizures for the rest of his days until he just dies in front of me and my son. It's like it's repeating for me. So I'm pretty stressed, but we've moved to take care of my wife's parents. So there we are, jammed into an apartment together, trying to live out this life that just is too close for comfort. And it sends my wife the wrong way. So she goes out on her parties, and I, try and hide myself away, and we become incredibly distant to the point that we are now separated, So that's really the start of it. And seeing other people at this point, we're like trying to get out of this horrible situation, and we're blaming it all on each other because, well, I didn't help her enough, and, she hasn't been a soft, gentle wife or whatever it is. Just things that come with the territory of immense pain. My mom had just died. Her granddad had just died. Her dad tries to take his life. It's an endless slew of death and pain through demonic influence. So our family splits apart, and she falls into drug use. And just through virtue of who she knew as a kid, hey, she's growing up. Hey, what are you guys doing? Okay, sure. And we are now no longer together. I'm trying to find my place in a new city with no friends, no family, because now I'm out of the picture. So I'm going to situate myself somewhere as the slightly more sober one to hold down a job, take care of my son. So with my mom's recently given to me inheritance money, I'm going to put a down payment on a house, and we're going to move in somewhere, just me and him. That's how it is. Okay. And during this time, I'll mention that I was about a foot away from the wrong side of a train. I had the blade in my hands a number of times, and I was not really, there was enough. It was a long life already. And to lose my two primary, my mom and my wife, on the anniversary of each other, she died, and then a year later, it was a separation. That was enough for me. I was ready to go. So without my son, I wouldn't have made that little extra effort to just stick around. But for us then, okay, I found a place. Great. She wants to move in. She's got nowhere else to go. She wants to use me for that money. She has no intent of really getting back together with me. She's still, off doing her stuff. So she's partying, and the drugs get worse. It gets to a point of I don't think she'd mind saying that, well, I'll hold it back just so I feel okay about it. But it's the type of drug that will drive you insane. and completely change your personality. It'll change you into a monstrous version of whoever you think you are. And for me at home, I'm using the weed vape pen to cope when he goes to bed, and I'm drinking here and there, and I'm playing video games every night. I have no way out. And I am deeply lost and depressed. And I thought I was as a teenager, and I was. But you think at some point it's going to ease up. You think after 15 plus years it's going to, I'm seeing the light a little bit now. Like, when is it going to end? When is this going to change? There was sleepless nights for her of screaming at me, suicide threats and all this. She was just taken, fully taken. She had no desire to change or come back. She thought, hey, maybe my relationship with the father of my child is going to work out, but I'm going to have fun until then. I remember sitting her down saying, are you going to quit these drugs so we can be parents? And she said, maybe in like 5 years. And she laughs at that sentence now, right? But I was there gritting my teeth like, how am I going to attempt to get you back if you're still on this, But that's what it was. There was one particular night, after many terrible nights, where at the end of sleeplessness and at the end of just my rope, I was laying in bed with my son right here on my chest, because we all like to cuddle together and sleep together. That I remember asking, God, what is going on? What has happened? How is my life like this? I just wanted to be a dad. Why is it so far off and so wrong? Is it me? You have a lot of questions. I said, God, I can't do it anymore. I can't take a single step forward. And somewhere in that feeling and thought, I saw what I'm going to describe now as, in the spirit, this golden blanket that came down upon me, about the size of a duvet, just gently across my body, but it sunk into me too. And as it did, it brought that peace that I described earlier as being the past is okay, the present's okay, and the future's okay. And it was with me, and it sat with me, knowing I hadn't probably had more than a couple hours sleep every night for the past couple months. It sat with me for 15 minutes or so and just let me feel that. And as it did, it placed a little ball of light in my heart, and the word flashed in my mind, knowledge. And I thought, knowledge of what? And I didn't get an answer straight away, but that was that peaceful experience that began to open a door for a lot of other softer experiences to filter in terms of I became on fire for the Bible. That's weird. I've never had that experience before. I began to see things in prayer. We had a night when my wife and I were safely back together, where we were praying about whether our son was going to be okay. And he and her woke up in the night, and they both felt and saw this little cross necklace. And he has a cross necklace from his Orthodox days, and they told me about it in the morning. Like, I thought he was wearing it, and then I went back to sleep, and he was like, no, I felt that we had the necklace there, in his little toddler words. And I believe that was God showing us that he is protected and looked after. So things like that began to happen after this experience. And she was still, it was that night she described to me, the night that after a few weeks of being drawn into church by a number of, too many to talk about really, but a number of strange ways that God will draw you into himself, into church. I found myself there with my son, just me and him. And I'll go in and cry in the pews, and experience that. And it wasn't the church that I thought would be good. It was too open and inclusive. And I thought it was meant to be rules and regulations type of church. So I was just there because it was down the road. But I went for coffee with the pastor, and we were chatting about it. Like, I'm like, so what's going on? I thought I was Christian, but I didn't really know. And what do you guys do here? And he told me. And then he said, do you mind if I pray for you? At the end of our conversation, I said, okay. Like, there's people around. Is that okay? And he starts to pray. I got my head down like, it's a good prayer. And I suddenly feel this vacuum above me that is sucking off demonic, like a multitude of dark entities from me. And he's not praying a deliverance prayer. He's just saying a prayer. And in that moment, I could feel like a rushing wind across my body. And I felt lighter, and I could almost see these entities leaving me. So I just looked up at him and said, thanks, see you later. A few weeks later, I tell him, by the way, that kind of happened. What's that? And he just said, oh, good. And strange things like that began to happen, It must have been a week after that I gave my life to Christ with his help. And that was a battle too. The words wouldn't come out of my mouth. And we had to struggle with that. But I did it. And it was that night that my wife was out. Well, I got back and she went out to party. And she couldn't hold anything down. She was throwing up. She couldn't get through the night the same way she had for the past few months. And as someone who had no desire to change, there was something mysterious about the fact that perhaps we are one, in God's eyes, we are one flesh. Because when I did that, it changed her too. Because it was that same time block that when I gave my life to Christ, she could no longer stomach the drugs she was on. And it changed her. It removed, like this, not like, oh, I think I'm going to try now. It removed deep-rooted addictions and deep-rooted pains. Her and I didn't know if we could touch each other lovingly again. And we had never been more in love. Shortly thereafter, when the Holy Spirit came down and I believe anointed me to begin that walk, I was able to love her in a way that was magnificent and new to me. It was a real Christ-like leadership. He was showing me, this is how I do it almost. Maybe you could try it like this. And I remember the forgiveness I was able to give her for everything she had done and all the pain of the past was one of the things that helped her instantly drop that addiction. She said, oh, I just don't want to anymore. Isn't that crazy? And I threw out the weed vape pen, haven't had a drink since, haven't played a video game since. It's turned my life upside down, which I didn't think was possible. How could such a thing be possible? It's beyond a medical explanation. But when I gave my life to Christ, the family was healed.
All right, there's a lot
Sorry.
packed into that I am going to try to make sure I, first of all, understand, and then I'm going to ask some specific questions around. So that's how that's going to happen, okay? So, marriage deteriorating rapidly, death, suicide attempt from father-in-law, all of the things.
All the things.
Until you finally, in earnest, truly cry out to God, asking why and how it got here. Did you ask him to save you from this, or did you just ask, tell me what happened? How did we get here?
I might have, in my intent, in the posture of my heart, I might have been presenting like a need for help.
Yeah.
But in terms of my mental, the words I remember using, it was more in just what is going on.
What is going on? So, but still a clear cry out in earnest to God.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in that moment, you said a blanket, a golden blanket, if I remember your words correctly, came down. You saw it, but you say you saw it in your spirit. What do you mean you saw it in your... Did you see it with your eyes, or did you see it with your spirit, in your spirit?
Well, I think I have to use that terminology just because I was laying there with my eyes open. However, it's sort of dreamlike. And so I'm just bridging the gap to say that what the terminology other people use when they talk about this type of thing is seeing in the spirit. And I'm like, well, maybe it's that. Because it's quite otherworldly. I don't...
How is it different than imagining it?
Indeed. I think if I imagined it, I wouldn't have been able to bestow upon myself the sensation that came with it, because I'm a very imaginative person. I'm a creative type. When I'm painting or writing a piece of music, there's an emotional content, but I have never felt that piece. If I can do that, which I can't, how awesome is that? But it just clearly wasn't of my own doing.
This was something, as a guy who has taken hallucinogens, gone to Peru in deep meditation with medicinal hallucinogens, plants, has experienced deep meditation, all the things with your imagination. This was different?
This was different. And it's marked as being different by what it produced, by the fruits too. If I had tried every psychology book, every alternative therapy, which I have, and I get to a point of being a know-it-all, like, well, this is how life is. You adopt a certain realism, and then something new comes in, supernatural. But I've tried the supernatural as well. I think it's then fair for me to give a review to say, this is different. And I'm annoyed that people hadn't made that more expressly clear in the past. That, yeah, there's being Christian and there's you're Christian, you know. Which one are you? You know, are you the one that has the relationship? I didn't know that was possible. Who tells you that? No one told my wife, who was growing up in that education system, knowing about Christ even, but no one says it in so many words that this is real. I still have to wake up now and go, okay, have the past 2 months been real?
Yeah.
This is new.
So this blanket, you say it was a sort of the size of a duvet? Is that what you said?
Yeah, just right.
Yeah. Golden?
Yeah.
Did you feel it?
Yes, I felt it moment by moment as it passed through my body. I felt it there, I felt it there, I felt it there, and I felt it there as it sunk in with the peace that it is.
And in an instant, you felt peace, not relaxation, but peace.
Yeah, an unending, timeless peace.
This is while your wife is out partying.
Oh, yeah, she's out partying and I'm crying.
And you're laying in your same nightly self-torture, considering what she may be doing in that moment.
Yeah.
And suddenly something gives you a timeless peace.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, I love speaking to you about this because you have partaken of every, seemingly, at least a large percentage of the options for acquiring that peace that the world has to offer, especially in New Age and drugs and other things that none of those things delivered what you are describing now. And so if I were to ask someone, explain this to me outside of God, if I wanted to find an expert, I would probably ask you because you've experienced the other things. Explain this without God.
You were lucky enough to find a trickster spirit that wanted you to believe for a time that you were at peace and being guided, and then it was all going to fall apart at some point. It was going to lead you somewhere dark. That is really, because I've had a number of spiritual experiences. How many of them were good? I don't know. I have a medium aunt who, at the time of my troubles with my wife leading up to this, would do me like a weekly tarot card. And you know what's funny? They made sense to me. They made sense. Like I was open access to be given relevant information through tarot cards. But when I gave my life to Christ, she tried it again without me asking, and it didn't make any sense. You know, those things stopped. But explaining that without God is just, well, I guess you just got lucky and you had a nice one. Because I haven't.
Yeah.
Aside from the elation of a drug that makes you high, I have not had a positive supernatural experience to date. And I was looking for it. You can look for it in Harry Potter. You can look for it in anything. You're looking for magic. People want magic.
Yeah.
Right?
That's good. So this experience changes you immediately. And it sounds like you were, is this when you began to experience forgiveness for your wife? Or was that in one of the later occurrences? Was this where it was?
I believe it's the beginning of that.
Yeah.
It's a blurry timeline, and it was all quite quick. So much was going on. I tried to keep a journal about it, but you have to admit the human error and say, okay, well, you know, where are things lining up there? I just think that without that moment,
right,
I wouldn't have beginning or praying in earnest.
So what was the immediate fruit of this encounter with the blanket, which you identify as the Holy Spirit, descending onto you? What was the immediate fruit before you got into the time with the pastor?
It was my own personal peace at that point. It wasn't a leadership role of peace.
Did you wake up the next day with peace?
I woke up with, I don't particularly remember. I just remember like I probably was gritting my teeth because she was about to show up at whatever early hour of the morning. All I know is that it had been given to me. And from then on, I wasn't expecting a particular change. I wasn't even asking for that particular experience, right? I didn't know. Like some people in our circle now know they're asking for a gift of the Spirit. I didn't know that's what happened, right? And I didn't even know, reading the Bible later, that knowledge, which was that ball of light placed in my heart, is listed as a gift of the Spirit. I'm like, oh, well, that's strange because I didn't even have a foreknowledge of that particular thing. What did I wake up with? I don't know. Probably a bit of despondency, probably a muscle memory of, I got to do another day, you know. But there was something new there, and I can recognize it in the way I began to treat my wife, which was with a forgiveness that I've never. You can't humanly manufacture that. At least I couldn't. There was way too much pain.
So immediately after this, in the days following this encounter, you began to treat her with a forgiving heart.
Yeah.
So that's that's immediate fruit in my. That's like okay.
Yeah.
That's transformation. That's like, I was not that person.
Yes.
Before the blanket.
Yeah.
After the blanket, it doesn't make sense because nothing else had changed except the way I saw her.
Yeah. 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 That's what happened.
Okay. You mentioned a voracious appetite for Scripture. When did that happen?
At that point. Also.
So also
Yeah.
fruit potentially from this experience.
Yeah.
So a hunger for God.
Yes, deep hunger. I'd never wanted to, because the only way to relate back to that peace given to me was when I had my hand on, or it on I would sleep with it, you know, because reading it was the only time I came close to that peace that I had experienced that night. Right? which was bizarre.
So that's, to use drug language, that's the way you got the hit that you would get that came with with scripture.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
cool.
Which was,
That's cool.
for me, as someone who had no background in that, there was no other way to ascertain, well, why didn't I go pick up the Quran? Or why didn't I go pick up something else? And it just is that. It just is that drawing in. If he really wanted me to go to a mosque or something else, I might have walked down that street. But for me, in that moment, I had an old Catholic Dewey Rhymes on the shelf, and that, in all honesty, was my moment of peace. And my wife would insult it, even though she revealed later that even in her delusion, she was praying, and in the years of our marriage, she was praying that I would become a good Christian man. She was like, she thought she was beyond saving. She thought, there's no way me, but take care of him.
Did she mock you for picking up the Bible?
Oh, yeah. She was like, oh, you Bible thumper. And I'm like, I have to. I can't put it down.
So that's supernatural in my view, right? That's not just trying a new thing.
It's not trying a new thing.
Yeah.
Because I tried that thing.
Yeah.
And I thought I tried the most legitimate version of it in Orthodoxy because it's the oldest version, right? So I'm closest to the original I thought I was doing. So
yeah. But you were just hungry for God's word. You were hungry for God. You were hungry for knowledge and understanding, which I'd love to get into this knowledge thing.
Yeah, that word is,
at some point here real soon. But another event occurred where a pastor just prays for you like pastors do. It doesn't sound like he walked you through forgiveness, repentance of sins. He just pray a blessing over you? Was it just...
Oh, I'm sure he prayed for my family, that we be okay. And he knew where I was coming from, like that darkness. And I'm asking, hey, I want to get involved here. I need some help. So he would have prayed something to that effect.
But you say you felt a suction...
A rushing wind
in your spirit, or did you feel it with the hair
externally?
on your arms?
No, externally, like across the top of
You felt a wind physically, as if a draft was moving through the room or a fan were blowing.
It was a physical sensation. Just like maybe the piece of the blanket was a physical sensation. I don't know if I was on the catwalk and the fan was blowing and my hair was, but I felt it. My eyes were tight shut. And again, to use the phrase seeing the spirit, it wasn't an empty sensation. It was combined with this feeling of there are things being lifted from me. Little dark gray, black.
Did you go into that prayer and that time with the pastor in hopes that something was going to get lifted from you?
Nope.
You just wanted to go have coffee with the pastor and talk about getting involved somehow.
Yeah, I just needed help. Yeah. And I didn't have any sense that this church would, other than being drawn into it. I was incredibly skeptical, to be honest.
Yeah. So he prayed, you participated, and unsolicited by you, these things you felt began to leave you.
Yeah.
What did that feel like? Can you describe that specifically? I mean, was it one after the other? Did you begin to feel lighter? Were you gaining clarity? How did that feel?
It just felt like somebody had run the feather duster across my back and just sort of swept and it was a cacophony of smaller little grimy grubs. It was this dark, like sea creature type sliminess that would be lifted from me. Probably in the hundreds, but quite quickly.
That's good.
So, yeah, but I didn't feel any particular thing afterwards other than like, oh, that was weird. What do I do now? But continue. And so continue I did, attending that church, etc.
And that day, if I remember your story correctly, or that very evening maybe, your wife goes out?
That was the night that I went back specifically
okay
to make sure I was getting it right. Like I kept asking him, what do I do? What do I do now? Because
So
something
this is
was
sometime later. How
Yeah,
much
about a
later?
week.
A week later or so. Okay.
Yeah. I was really trying to expedite the process, and because things were happening where from a supernatural and spiritual background, nothing had ever happened before that was positive. So I'm like, okay, I should probably follow this lead here.
Yeah.
So I did, and it was the night that I gave my life to Christ. That
Okay. So there's 3 sort of episodes here.
at least.
Okay, you're right. In this that you've highlighted. So episode 2 is the pastor praying and you feeling the lifting of little slime balls off of you.
Little slime
Hundreds
balls.
of them, according to your description. Was there immediate fruit from that before, kind of like it was before you had, so after on the first blanket thing, you had this peace, you began to get really hungry for God, for Scripture and understanding God, and so that's kind of some immediate fruit there. You began to treat your wife with this forgiveness that you couldn't explain because the circumstances hadn't changed.
Yeah.
That was fruit right after that. Was there immediate fruit after this particular encounter of this lifting?
If there was, it was subtle, because other than the fruit of his guidance,
Yeah.
I didn't have a particular marker other than that, remembering and experiencing that. So then it was just keep going. It was like a leading experience.
And some days later, I guess in your continued search for God and knowledge and understanding, what prompted you to go back and give your life to Christ?
When that man, my pastor, was sharing the gospel, I just couldn't look away. That he is a good speaker, and he is very biblically accurate and on point. But as well, I wanted to stare that man down, and I got him to go out for coffee with me a couple of times. Like, we're going out. I need to hear what you have to say. And he would just sit down and say, well, the Bible says. And it was that was the only food I was hungry for. That was it. So it was totally by my own drive at that point to, what are you doing? When's the next? Are you doing something on Wednesday night? Are you doing something on the Monday? What's that? And I can't explain that. I thought it was cringe and weird until it happened. So there I was, going back continually to experience as much as I could. And during that time, it was still the same friend group for her, and I bumped into them a couple of times, and it got more and more gross, which is more and more offensive to her, who was still in it and trying to show them love as her friends, but with no way to separate herself from the circumstance, and thinking, oh, well, I can... She was going to try and mix the worlds for a minute there, be like, well, I can do both, right? I can be a mom and a addict. And whatever my response was, which was entirely led by the Holy Spirit, I'm not going to claim any aspect of the goodness that I was able to show her as mine, because I had tried to be a good husband for a number of years and had no fruit, no results, worse and worse. But in that moment, whatever I did and said worked, because it wasn't me, fully. Do you know what I mean? I'm not going to try and claim that I was able to...
No. I mean, that's not what you're claiming at all.
No, good, yeah.
I don't hear that at all. I mean, what I heard from you was the gospel. You couldn't take your eyes off of it. It was, you were so deeply drawn to it. And so you committed your life to following Christ?
Yeah.
That night?
Yeah,
that day?
That night, whenever it was, and, a number of verses have been coming up to me, you do the old, what page am I going to open the Bible to today? And there was a lot of clues for me with Jeremiah 33:3 of crying out, and things being made known to me that were otherwise unknown. And I think that verse really drew me in somehow. However, a living book doesn't, you know what I mean? My background is like the analogy of sowing the seeds. I'm rough ground, you know. It took some major work to let any of this blossom in my life, because I still am like, wait, what am I saying? Like, I would have never said that a few months ago, that the scripture was alive and that it was talking to me, and that it's a living book. And I have no, if I were to send this video when this comes out to friends or family, it's going to be like, maybe taken with seriousness because it's me and they know me, but at the same time, the atmosphere is like, what? Are you okay? There's not a hub for me to fall back on to say, this has been my experience. You know, so all my muscle memory in the flesh is saying, remember sin? Remember pain? Hey, remember when this was you? And I am contrasting the two. I'm going, yeah, and that was all real. I mean, it feels like a stage play at this point, my past. It doesn't feel significant or like it's weighing me down or anything like that, but it's been made. I mean, when they say you've been made anew, you've been made anew.
You clearly have been made anew. But your wife is still an addict. Is she an addict at this point?
Oh, yeah. And
so
she doesn't want to
she's
stop.
not a casual user. She's an addict.
Yeah.
I mean, you would clearly say that.
Yeah.
But what you said, if I'm not mistaken, was that the day that you accepted Christ, the day you committed to following him, which, by the way, is after two events where you've had these supernatural encounters that you've never experienced before, and you don't really have a box to put them in.
Mm-hmm.
So he's walking you into something.
Yeah.
You give your life to Christ. And if I heard you correctly, you said that her addictions were removed.
Yeah, and mine.
And yours.
Yeah.
She didn't give her life to Christ in this, unless I missed something here. Did she go to the church with you and you guys holding hands together and both did this together?
No.
You gave your life to Christ, and your addicted wife's addictions fell off that day. She went out, and when she consumed it, she threw it up. Did you say that?
Yeah.
Like,
that's how she's told me, you know, I was in bed.
but that day,
yeah.
she had no tolerance for the things that she was addicted to.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen naturally.
No, it doesn't, does it? No withdrawals, no like pain, no like, maybe I'll try it again one day. Just like, I'm free. But
no desire. It wasn't like she said, I'm tired. At least you didn't describe this, and if I'm getting this wrong, tell me. But it's not like she said, I'm tired of this. I really want to stop, but I can't. I'm still addicted. And then it happened. She went out as usual to do the same things, right?
Yeah.
She didn't ask to be released from her addictions, did she? That you know of?
No, she has said she wasn't asking for that. She didn't want that. She liked them. They were the only time she had fun. She was so depressed. So doing the drugs with the friend group was the most alive she'd felt in a while.
And before the next sleep for her, they are gone.
Yeah.
Again, I would ask, explain that without God.
Well, I can't. I'll try. Let's try, hey?
I mean, whoever, write
Yeah.
in, send a video in if you've got an explanation about how that happens without God. Strongerfaith.org is the contact form. I want to know how that happens without God.
Maybe she was too sleepy Maybe she'd gone so many nights without sleep that she just had to take a little break. But maybe I was becoming some attractive extremist, like, oh, he's really convicted now. That's a reliable masculine trait. Maybe that was convincing enough? I don't think so.
Explain that without God, right? You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I know some people who don't understand what we do here don't understand why I try to ask the questions of the skeptic. And I ask the questions of the skeptic because the skeptic is a child of God. And if we don't address their questions, they can dismiss things without. They say, well, I bet they won't ask this question, and they didn't, and so they move right on. And Scripture tells us to love those who doubt, and so we do that. Mm-hmm. And it's not that I'm the skeptic. I mean, certainly I am a skeptic, and I like to. I'm an analytical thinker, but I want to uncover all the possibilities and say, what's left? What's reasonable here? And when I hear a thing like this, the only reasonable explanation is a clear movement of God. There's nothing natural that we see repeatable in the natural world occurring in your situation that you're describing, in my view. So there may be some sort of doctor or whoever that works in medicines and all that stuff. I don't know. They can say, well, maybe. I don't think so. I don't think so.
Yeah.
Bring it. I want to know what it is. I think it's God, and I just So.
Yeah. Because as well, one thing for me I would struggle with would be secret CIA technology. Like they have all this stuff they're holding back on us. So then you wonder, well, what if there was an implanted thought? What if there was a emotion machine and which they might well have in their bunkers? We don't know. However, I just don't. Even then, I don't believe it would be so successfully all-encompassing, knowing all the nuance and the details of who I am, you are, of who everyone is, to clean house that way.
Yep.
It's still run by a human.
Yeah, you have to get into some extreme conspiracy theory conjecture to get to something that's a possible explanation to this other than God.
Yeah.
And wow, so that was a couple of months ago?
Yeah, must have been cresting 2 months, a little more than that. And, we had a lot of beautiful things since then, of gifts we had a family sing-song on Christmas Day, and, I was able to perform, like I mentioned, in church. Music suddenly made sense to me, and things have continued to happen, as well as the negative. There's still a lot of. We've been attacked at night by spirits as well, and just remember God waking me up and waking up members of the church too. We have a little group chat, right? So it's like, I'm going to need a prayer in a second, and someone does it, and things change in the situation. And I've been attacked in dreams. So is my wife. I tried to put on my son really wanted me to wear a necklace, a little crystal bead necklace from my auntie, and put it on, and it's cold and dark, and I had to.
You felt that?
Oh yeah, there was a real sense about this crystal necklace I've never had before. If you want to be someone who's living a wizarding, whatever atheistic term you want to use for a supernatural life, again, I just think I didn't have access to what a wonderful and dynamic world this really is when you're in the right path, because strange things keep happening.
How has it changed you and your wife in your marriage?
Well, for the better. How it's changed us is there was just not any peace in the home, really, ever. I didn't have a way to lead our family beyond this hyper aggression into this search for a father figure and for some semblance of masculinity because I'm looking into how to have a family. And then you get into YouTube videos about, well, there's so many things about the male, the manosphere, and being a certain way. But it turns out when you give up leadership to an actual seasoned leader like God, things have begun to flow in my life that I've never been able to enjoy before. Day-to-day things, decision-making, what we're going to do with our time, how we're provided for. It's really touched every aspect of the married couple's life. And I wonder, what was the most valuable thing to God when I cried out? Was it the safety of my son? Was it my journey? Was it my wife's? Was it the unity of the family? What transformed her under this one flesh marriage covenant? And what was God's motivation to do it then? Was it that there was a kid in the house? Because what he did has healed a home. He's shown us a healed home where I couldn't have figured it out on my own, and I tried. So I just say it's a happy life. I'm able to do things now in terms of my forgiveness that just is my world upside down. I would pray to go into work before I go in, like, okay, Jesus, please be with me at work today. And I would go in, and one time he puts this little lens over my eyes almost. And to cheapen it, I call it, like his Jesus showing me how he sees things. But it was this whole experience of, I was able to love everyone in that establishment as a child of God in a way that was really fulfilling to me. It removed any of my human flaws in judgments of people. And for about 2 hours there, I was walking around. He said, this is how I love my children.
Had you ever experienced that before?
No.
In all the alternative things that you tried, had you ever experienced anything like that before?
No. If you're not a child of God in anything else. You're not truly a child of God in anything else. If you're a child, you might be an indigo child. There might be some new age term for what bracket of star sign and whatever you align with. But I challenge people who know in that sphere that God is love to listen to what I just said about love and experiencing love for others. And when you look at some of these people who go to church who are just full of joy, and it's so joyful it is kind of weird. What if that was real? And what if that was a gift? And what if your life could be like that? And that it's not super cringe, it's actually the most fulfillment you're going to feel? What if that, bubbly older lady at the church who's really happy to be there is happy for an actual reason?
And it's not an act, and she changes when she goes home like everybody assumes.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
What if?
People who've experienced it, I've experienced it. Our home was a home of not what it is now. Mm. And our home is a joy-filled place and a place of peace.
Yeah.
Just like you're describing. And I didn't do it. My wife will say, yeah, you changed. You stopped being a jerk. And I would say, and you stopped being this way. And we look at each other and, boy, remember how it was before. And we didn't read a book and then implement the techniques that we learned.
Right. That's important. The moment I experienced this, I would try to relay some of it to people, friends and family that I could trust with that level of information, saying, hey, everything's better now. And they pat me on the back and say, good job. Really, man, you were able to do that. Good job. And some people would try and talk about the book they were reading. They'd say, oh, yeah, it's a crazy what a mindset can do, or talk about applicable techniques for changing your life, Oh yeah, Tony Robbins, yeah, he really helped me get off the... And I'm saying, no, it's not. It's not like I tried a new technique. I cried out in pain to God, and he said, yeah. He answered. And that's different to I changed my mindset about something. I didn't change my mindset to the point that everything we've discussed, right?
That's a big deal.
It's a big deal.
Because we're in a world, and I'm all for reading books that give you insights into how to deal with things in life. I consume that spiritually and otherwise, and I think that's great.
Yeah.
In my experience, that's not what this was, and for me. And when you describe it as someone who also is a smart person who reads and searches, I can't. How do you not take your word for it? I mean, you've been on both sides of this. You're seeing it from every angle. Mm-hmm. All you can do is report the transformation, and it's evident. I love hearing from people who have experienced the position that the opponents of Christianity are in, and had the same positions they did until they experienced and say, I was wrong, and I didn't understand.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just telling you, you don't understand. It's not what you think it is, and it's the truth. Mm-hmm. It turns out to be the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we try to do here. It is not a, hey, I was taught this religious Christian thing as a child, and I'm just going to carry it and batter people to death with it until you succumb and follow in line with the rules. It's not the position we're in. We're in the position of, I've experienced the things the world has to offer and didn't believe this version or that this God thing was real. But I didn't subscribe to a belief system of theology or religion. I experienced something. Yeah. This is about experiencing God, not a debate about doctrine and theology. And I don't know how somebody debates your experience.
Well, that's the thing, too. It's beautiful. It's beautiful like art because art is subjective, yet so is this experience. And so you get the position of, well, I'm just going to choose not to believe what I heard because it's subjective. You get that. But I don't think I would have traveled quite so far to be here to talk with the channel that really made sense of some of my experiences, to share it. There's a conviction there. There's a number of things that would lead someone to say, okay, maybe he's saying something there. And I would just say, what have you got to lose? I said earlier about the amount of time you've put into anything else. And what if it took you 1 second of earnest heart posture to put yourself before God and say, okay, what if you were real, and what if we did something here? It doesn't have to be out of pain. I think people should learn from pain. My life was full of it. I don't want somebody to have my life. It's terrible. And I don't want to hear more and more and more about that from the generations beneath us. This is the point. We can learn something. And what if we were believed in our experience too? And maybe that's not how it works, but I hope that someone makes the choice to come out of their pain right now.
Well, yeah. So you're a searcher. You're a smart guy. You have a creative mind. I think you're an analytical thinker. I feel like you've probably, in this short amount of time since these things have occurred, analyzed and what's going on here and searched for meaning behind all the little things, and understanding all the things that have happened and getting understanding from it. Have you been able to assemble anything from all that that would be compiled into a message for others or messages for others that you've gathered from all of this?
If I had a message for others, it would be that experience of love that you know exists is available to you. And as much as we might think that it's just a dusty old book and that, we can't trust the older generations because, hey, they were working with asbestos and they put leeches on their skin to cure disease, and the past is a grimy place, and it's full of traps and trappings. But there's no way that numerous full-fledged addictions can be healed within a 24-hour period and removed from numerous people through a really brief, call it, encounter. These things don't last long. These things aren't, I'm now in this 24 hours. You're still walking through the street. You're still on the earth. And yet, it just doesn't take much at all. And I remember saying to my pastor, I'm scared to give my life to Jesus. What's he going to do with it? That's somebody else. That's not me. You want me to give up control? Are you miserable right now? Is somebody miserable right now and they haven't done that? What if somebody did that right now? What if they gave their life to Jesus and it just changed things for them? I think that's a wonderful gift that you have access to that you should probably make use of.
That would normally be where we would end, but I got one last question.
Sure.
Have you noticed additional supernatural occurrences? Have you been given, do you feel, any gifts of the Spirit? And where does knowledge come in?
Knowledge is a fascinating word now to me because the beginning of knowledge is the fear of the Lord. Type in knowledge into your Bible search bar, right? There's a number of really interesting points that crops up. Like I said, I didn't know it was listed as a gift of the Spirit. I didn't know its significance in terms of, and I don't know what it is. Knowledge of what? I guess I know that God is real now. Was it that? Was it as simple as that? And what gifts do I have beyond that? I've prayed away headaches now. I've prayed away odd ailments. I've made an impact in my day-to-day life through prayer. And so have the people around me who do it. I've seen things. I remember the first night, my wife and son, and we all get into bed. We're clean, we're clear. We all lay down, he's in the middle. And I close my eyes, and I can hear the chord, this endless chord. And as a musician, I just have to describe that as try and build a really big chord on a piano. Okay, use all the notes on the scale. So loud almost, capped for my human ears, but so loud that it would burst my eardrums if if it burst forth into the room with this beautiful chord, celebrating a family united. Every night for weeks I would close my eyes and stamped on my prefrontal, wherever the imagination takes place but beyond, because I can manipulate an apple in my head. I can think about an apple spinning around. Okay, sure, there it is. But right there, a little bit in front of that, the gates, the golden gates of a kingdom, as if to say, you're saved, and that's... but I don't want to speak too soon. I sin. And I know what it is, but I just want to be humble about it because it's terrifying. And I just want other people to feel that, or at least the most minuscule version of it, of you don't have to have it be like a action. There's not explosions going off behind me every day. They're little gentle things. It's not like a movie. It's just life, but good. And if I have some ministry or gift that is meant to come forward at some point, great, let's do that. But it's been a fascinating few months, and he wants me to work on my faith. He said, here's an example of how life can be. And then he let me think about it, and he let me play with it almost and be like, okay, well, what if I go and do something bad? What if I have a bad thought? It's like, yeah, you can do that. Doesn't feel good, does it? No. And he's letting me work and grow my faith now too. So I'm just trying to follow as astutely as I can and not mess it up, because it's too good to mess up.
And Searcher has been changed, and so is his family, his wife. It's amazing. It's amazing how she was brought along to, not of her own free will, into freedom, committed to the prison that she was living in, pulled to freedom. Amazing. Oscar Ellis, beautifully done. Oscar and his family are still in the early stages of this new life, but the inbreaking of God into their world is unmistakable. Their family was healed with a single touch from God that started when Oscar, in his most vulnerable, desperate, and powerless state, earnestly cried out to God. God answered Oscar's prayer and healed his family. And I have been sent to tell you that this is also available to you. Be willing to redefine what it means to believe in God. Call out to Him with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. I believe that He will hear your cries and heal you. Thank you for joining us today on A Stronger Faith. For more information about prayer, recommended books, ways to contact us, and how to find us on other platforms and social media, please see this episode's description or visit our website at astrongerfaith.org. If you feel like you or someone you know has experienced God and would make a great guest with us, please visit astrongerfaith.org/contact. Follow the instructions there and let us know about it. Almost all of our guests come to us through our contact form. Also, this ministry is driven by God, but it is fueled by the donations of our listeners. This has allowed us to continue to find, interview, and distribute the conversations God is using to build His kingdom and bring His children to freedom. It has also allowed us to expand our reach in the world and our ability to help those in need of prayer and deliverance in a substantial way. We have a lot more that we believe that God is calling us into this year. So if you feel like God may be prompting you to join us in this work by becoming a financial supporter, please visit astrongerfaith.org/give for options. Until next time, we pray for your peace and for a stronger faith for you and those you love.